Billionaire came home early, and what he saw his wife doing to his black adoptive father made his blood run cold. The man who taught him dignity was being treated like dirt. The house built with billions echoed with quiet cruelty. And the woman David trusted most believed one thing: that power meant she'd never be questioned. But she forgot something dangerous. You can humiliate a man in silence. You can lie when no one's watching. But the moment a son sees the truth, everything changes. Because this wasn't just disrespect. This was calculated abuse. And when a billionaire discovers his own home has become a crime scene, someone always pays the price. Stay with me. Because what happens next doesn't just expose a wife. It destroys an entire world she thought was untouchable. For years, David Thompson believed his home was safe. A place of success, order, control. A place where the man who raised him, his black adoptive father, could finally rest after a lifetime of sacrifice. But power has a way of revealing the truth people hide. While David built an empire, someone inside his own mansion was rewriting reality, turning love into weakness, respect into humiliation, and family into a weapon. What David didn't know was that every smile had an agenda, every act of concern hid something darker, and every quiet moment his father endured was preparing the ground for a betrayal no one would see coming. This isn't just a story about money. It's about control, about racism dressed as respectability, and about the most dangerous mistake anyone can make: underestimating a son who remembers exactly who raised him. Because when the truth finally surfaces, it won't be loud at first. It will be surgical. And by the time it's over, nothing will be left standing. David Thompson wasn't supposed to be home yet. The flight was delayed, meetings had stacked up, and his assistant had already informed everyone he'd arrive late the next morning. That's why the silence inside the Malibu mansion felt wrong. No music, no laughter, no warm greeting, just tension. David stepped inside quietly, his expensive shoes barely making a sound on the polished floor. The house that was built to impress suddenly felt cold, like it was holding its breath. He loosened his tie, smiling to himself. He wanted to surprise his adoptive father, the man who had taken him in when no one else would, the man who worked himself half to death just to make sure David never felt abandoned again. This was supposed to be a happy moment. Then David heard voices, sharp, controlled, cruel. He stopped near the kitchen hallway, instincts screaming that something was off. A woman's voice cut through the air, sweet on the surface, poisonous underneath. "You're not supposed to be here when guests are around." David froze. That voice belonged to his wife. Then came another voice, older, softer, careful. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I was just trying to—" The sentence never finished. "Trying?" his wife snapped. "You don't try anything in this house unless I tell you to." David's stomach tightened. That voice, that wasn't a stranger. That was the same man who had taught him how to ride a bike. The same man who worked night shifts so David could afford school supplies. The same man who told him, "No matter how big you get, remember who stood with you when you had nothing." His father. David leaned closer, heart pounding. He saw him then, standing near the counter, shoulders slightly hunched, hands trembling. Not from age, but from humiliation. He wasn't dressed like family. He was dressed like staff. A cheap uniform, plain, degrading. David felt something inside him snap. His wife stood across from him, arms crossed, wearing the same smile she used at charity events, the one that fooled everyone. "Let's make this clear," she said coldly. "You're here because my husband insists, not because you belong." The word belong hit David like a punch to the chest. His father lowered his eyes. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll stay out of the way." That's when David realized something terrifying. This wasn't new. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was routine. And if this was happening while David was in the house, what the hell was happening when he was gone? David stepped back into the shadows, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He didn't interrupt. He didn't explode. Not yet. Because the most dangerous thing in the world isn't an angry billionaire. It's a patient one who just learned the truth. And his wife had no idea. She had just started the war of her life. David didn't step into the kitchen yet. He stood frozen behind the marble column, his chest tight, listening as the woman who raised him was slowly stripped of her dignity, sentence by sentence. Isabella straightened her designer blouse and looked Ruth up and down like she was inspecting dirt on the floor. "Since you're already here," Isabella said coldly, "you can clean the breakfast dishes. I have a lunch meeting." Ruth hesitated for half a second, not because she didn't understand, but because she hoped, foolishly, that maybe today would be different. "Yes, ma'am," Ruth said quietly. That single phrase hit David harder than any insult. "Yes, ma'am." The woman who worked 3 jobs. The woman who skipped meals so he could eat. The woman who taught him how to read code before he even understood money. Reduced to obedience. Isabella smirked, satisfied. And remember, she added casually, use the service sink. I don't want my guests seeing this. She gestured vaguely toward Ruth. Her hair, her hands, her presence. Ruth nodded again and moved toward the sink near the back hallway. Her shoulders were slightly hunched now. David noticed that too. She hadn't walked like that when she first moved in. From behind the column, David watched as Ruth scrubbed plates that had barely been touched. Luxury food thrown away while she rinsed her hands in cold water. Isabella poured herself a glass of fresh juice, checked her phone, and laughed softly at a message. Honestly, she said without looking up, I don't know why David insists on playing hero. Charity has limits. Ruth flinched. That was it. David felt something ancient wake up inside him. Not anger, not rage. Memory. A flash of himself at 9 years old, sitting on a broken couch in Chicago, scared, unwanted, waiting for someone who never came. And Ruth kneeling in front of him, smiling gently, saying, You're safe now, baby. Back in the kitchen, Isabella's voice sharpened. And don't forget, she said, tonight my friends are coming over. You'll stay out of sight. Basement. Understood? Ruth swallowed. Yes, Isabella. David clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. She didn't even call her Mrs. Thompson anymore. That respect had been stripped away too. Isabella walked out of the kitchen, heels clicking confidently down the hallway, completely unaware that her entire world was about to collapse. Ruth stood alone at the sink for a moment longer than necessary. She pressed her fingers together, steadying herself. Then softly, almost inaudibly, she whispered, I should never have come here. That whisper shattered David. Silently, without making a sound, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen lit up, and for the first time since he arrived home, David Thompson started recording. Not for revenge, not for drama, but because some truths needed proof, and some betrayals deserved consequences. David didn't confront Isabella that night. That alone should tell you how serious this was. Instead of rage, something colder took over him. Calculation. Because one thing was now clear. What he had just witnessed in the kitchen wasn't a mistake. It wasn't stress, and it definitely wasn't new. That night, long after Isabella fell asleep, David went back to his office. He didn't open emails. He didn't check stock prices. He opened the security archive. At first, he told himself he was just being cautious. Maybe reviewing a few days, a week at most. But minutes turned into hours. And hour by hour, his stomach sank lower. He saw Isabella's smile change the moment David's car left the driveway. He saw Ruth's posture change. Shoulders lowering, voice shrinking, eyes avoiding contact. One clip showed Ruth standing quietly in the hallway, holding folded laundry. Isabella walked past her and said nothing. But when Ruth tried to follow her into the living room, Isabella suddenly snapped. Did I tell you that you could leave the service area? David paused the footage. He watched Ruth apologize. Not once. Not twice. 3 times. Another video. 2 weeks earlier. Ruth was setting the table carefully, using the good plates, the ones David liked. Isabella stormed in. She swept the plates into the trash. Don't embarrass me, she said calmly. You're here to clean, not to play family. Ruth bent down and picked up broken porcelain with bare hands. David zoomed in. Her fingers were bleeding. No reaction from Isabella. Then came the clip that broke him. 6 months ago. Ruth had prepared soup and left it warming on the stove. The stove alarm beeped softly. Isabella turned it off and turned the heat down to cold. She took the pot and placed it in the basement. The camera caught her whispering, If you're hungry later, you know where it is. Ruth came down hours later. She ate it cold, standing, in silence. David leaned back in his chair, chest tight, vision blurred. This wasn't cruelty in moments of anger. This was routine. This was practice. This was a woman who knew exactly when the cameras mattered, and when David was gone long enough for the mask to come off. And then David saw something else. A pattern. Every time Ruth tried to reach out to someone, a phone call, a letter, even a visit request, Isabella intervened. Calls unanswered. Mail missing. Appointments rescheduled. Isolation. Deliberate, surgical, complete. David whispered to himself. This has been happening for months. No. Longer. Years. And the worst part? Ruth never complained. Not once. Because she wasn't weak. She was protecting him. The same way she always had. That's when David realized something that changed everything. Isabella didn't just hate Ruth. She believed Ruth was replaceable. Disposable. And that meant this was no longer about disrespect. It was about removal. And David knew, with terrifying clarity, that if he didn't act fast, the next step wouldn't be humiliation. It would be disappearance. David didn't explode. That's what made it dangerous. Men like him didn't survive boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and corporate wars by reacting emotionally. They survived by waiting, watching, and setting perfect timing. By morning, David was calm. Too calm. He kissed Isabella goodbye like nothing had changed, poured coffee, read the news, played the roles she thought she knew. And Isabella smiled, confident, careless, untouchable. She had no idea her world had already started collapsing. The first move wasn't loud. It was administrative. David quietly rerouted the household security feed, all cameras, all backups, to a private server Isabella had no access to. Then he expanded it. New angles, blind spots eliminated, audio activated. Next came the staff. David called in the house manager under the excuse of budget restructuring. One question, calm voice. How does Isabella treat Ruth when I'm gone? The manager hesitated. That hesitation was all David needed. By noon, David had statements. Not accusations, timestamps. By evening, he had a private investigator on retainer. Someone who didn't ask questions, just delivered facts. Then David went to Ruth, not as a son needing answers, but as a man trying not to break. He found her in the garden, trimming roses that didn't belong to her. "Do you feel safe here?" he asked. Ruth froze. That silence lasted longer than any confession ever could. She smiled softly, said, "I don't want to cause trouble." David nodded. That was the moment his plan locked into place, because abusers rely on silence, and David was about to turn silence into a weapon. That night, he sent Isabella a message. "Big dinner tomorrow, important people, dress well." Isabella loved that. She always did. Public spaces were her stage. Private cruelty was her secret. She had no idea David had already invited witnesses. Legal witnesses. Social witnesses. People whose opinions mattered. And Ruth? David arranged for her to be present. Not hidden, not dismissed, not in uniform. Just visible. Isabella noticed immediately. Her smile tightened. Her voice sharpened. But she behaved. For now. David watched from across the room, glass in hand, expression unreadable. Because the trap wasn't about exposing Isabella once. It was about letting her expose herself. And when she did, there would be no denials, no explanations, no way out. Only consequences. And Isabella? She laughed that night. Confident, unaware. Because the most dangerous traps aren't sprung with force. They're sprung with patience.
Isabella thought she was finally winning. David had gone quiet. Too quiet, he stopped asking questions. Stopped hovering. Stopped checking on Ruth. To Isabella. That silence felt like surrender. She mistook patience for weakness, and that mistake would cost her everything that morning. She moved through the house with a new confidence. The kind that comes when someone believes they've already crushed their enemy. Ruth was in the kitchen, carefully slicing fruit. Her hands slower than they used to be, her shoulders slightly hunched. Isabella didn't bother hiding her contempt anymore. "You're cutting it wrong," she snapped, pushing the plate back toward Ruth. "Honestly, I don't know why David insists on pretending this little charity project is family." Ruth didn't respond. She had learned that silence reduced punishment. Isabella smirked. "You know?" She continued casually pouring herself coffee. Sunny Acres called again. "They're very impressed with the notes I've been keeping," she said it lightly. Almost proudly. "They agree someone with your background and limitations shouldn't be living in a house like this." Behind the walls, cameras watched in the vents, in the hallway. In the corners, Isabella never bothered to. Notice every word was being captured, time-stamped, backed. Up in 3 different locations, Ruth's hands trembled slightly. "I never asked to stay," she said quietly. Isabella leaned closer. "That's the problem. People like you never ask. You just linger. You take up space until someone finally puts you where you belong." She laughed softly, a laugh meant for herself. "You should be grateful I'm handling this privately. Institutions can be rough." What Isabella didn't realize was that David was listening live, not from the house, from his phone, from the secure server he had activated the night before. Every insult, every threat, every carefully rehearsed lie. And Isabella kept talking, because arrogant people always do. Later that afternoon, she made another mistake, a bigger one. She called one of her friends. On speaker. "I swear," Isabella scoffed. Pacing the living room, "I've been documenting everything. Confusion, wandering, mood swings. By the time David realizes what's happening, she'll already be gone." A pause, then a laugh. "Yes, of course I exaggerated. You think those places ask questions? They hear elderly, black, and no biological ties. They don't push back. She stopped in front of Ruth, lowered her voice, and once she's committed, David will finally be free of this embarrassing reminder of where he came from. That was the moment, not the insults, not the threats, not even the plan to erase Ruth permanently. It was the smile Isabella wore when she said it, because cruelty wasn't a lapse for her. It was a strategy, and David recorded every second that night. Isabella went to bed believing she had full control, believing David was distracted by business, believing Ruth was already defeated, believing her world was untouchable. She never noticed David standing in the doorway long after she fell. Asleep, silent, still, watching, not with anger but with precision, because the trap was no longer being built. It was already set, and Isabella had just stepped fully inside it. David didn't confront Isabella. Not yet. That was the mistake she expected him to make. Instead, he did something far more dangerous. He started removing her power piece by piece, so quietly she wouldn't realize she was already losing. The first call happened at 6:12 a.m. David's private attorney answered on the second ring. "I need every document reviewed," David said calmly. "Every authorization, every signature, every account my wife touches personally or legally." There was a pause. Then the lawyer said the words Isabella never imagined would be spoken about her. "You're right to move fast. She has temporary authority in 3 areas: healthcare decisions, household accounts, and discretionary trust access." "Not anymore," David replied, within hours. Changes were set in motion that didn't make noise. No alerts, no emails. No confrontation, just locks quietly clicking into place. By noon, Isabella's access to Ruth's medical files was revoked. Hospitals were notified. Care facilities were flagged. Any attempt to make decisions on Ruth's behalf would now require David's direct approval. Isabella's plan to institutionalize Ruth, dead, and she didn't even know it yet. That afternoon, David moved to the finances. He didn't freeze accounts that would raise suspicion. Instead, he reclassified them. Spending limits were adjusted. Transfer permissions quietly restricted. Large transactions now required secondary verification. To Isabella, everything looked normal. Her card still worked. Her apps still opened. Her lifestyle didn't change, but the leash had been tightened, and she was already at the end of it. That evening, Isabella returned from the spa, relaxed, confident, smiling like a woman who believed the world was still bending to her will. She kissed David's cheek. "Busy day?" she asked casually. "Always," he replied. She didn't notice the subtle shift in the house. Didn't notice the way staff now checked with David instead of her. Didn't notice that Ruth's room had been quietly moved back to the main wing. Didn't notice the security system updates. She was still performing, still lying, still manipulating, still planning. But now, every move she made was happening inside a cage she couldn't see. That night, David stood alone in his office, watching live feeds from the house. Ruth slept peacefully upstairs, warm, safe, untouched. And for the first time since coming home early, David didn't feel rage. He felt control, because Isabella still thought she was winning. She still thought the final move belonged to her, and David knew something she didn't. The moment power changes hands silently, the ending is no longer a question of if, only how devastating it will be. Isabella didn't slow down. She sped up. The moment David quietly pulled back, no arguments, no resistance, no questions. She took it as weakness. In her mind, silence meant surrender. And that's when she made the move that sealed her fate. Over breakfast, he leaned into her performance harder than ever. Soft voice, concerned eyes, fingers gently touching David's arm like a loving wife. "I spoke to the facility again," she said casually, as if discussing groceries. "They have an opening sooner than expected. Monday morning." She smiled while saying it. David kept his expression neutral, but inside every alarm went off. This wasn't patience anymore. This was urgency, desperation. Isabella wasn't just planning, she was rushing because she felt control slipping. She started tightening Ruth's routine. No garden time. No phone calls unless supervised. She misplaced Ruth's reading glasses, hid her medication, and later accused her of forgetting to take it. Every small cruelty carefully staged to look like decline, and Isabella documented everything. Notes, photos, voice memos. She thought she was building a case. What she didn't realize was that she was feeding evidence directly into David's hands. That same afternoon, Isabella made a call she shouldn't have. She locked herself in the study, confident David was in meetings. She didn't know the recording app was already active on his phone, remotely synced, quietly listening. "I need this handled fast," Isabella whispered into her phone. "Before he changes his mind." Pause. "Yes, guardianship. I already have documentation. Dementia, confusion, emotional instability." Another pause. "No, she won't fight it. She's weak. She always backs down." David listened from his car, hands gripping the steering wheel, jaw clenched so tight it ached to weak. The woman who raised him with double shifts and empty pockets, the woman who taught him dignity when the world showed none. Isabella kept talking. "If we wait too long, he might interfere," she said. "I need the paperwork pushed through. I'll handle him." That was it. In that moment, David knew two things. First, Isabella wasn't acting out of fear. She was acting out of confidence. And second, she had just crossed from cruelty into criminal intent. That evening, Isabella tried one last manipulation. She cornered Ruth in the hallway. Voice low, venomous. "Pack a small bag," she said. "Just essentials." "You're leaving soon?" Ruth didn't argue. She didn't cry, she simply nodded. But what Isabella didn't see was David standing just out of sight, watching his wife's issue, which he thought was a final order. He didn't step in. He didn't confront her because the trap was no longer being built. It was ready, and Isabella, convinced she was winning, had just walked straight into it, smiling. Isabella thought she was winning. That was the most dangerous part, while she moved faster, making calls, signing papers, rehearsing her lies. David moved quieter, and quiet power always wins. That morning, Isabella woke up energized, almost glowing. Her plan was finally accelerating. Sunny Acres had availability. Her lawyer had been cooperative. The narrative was set. Elderly black father, declining mental state. Concerned white wife stepping in. She walked through the house with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. What she didn't know was that the house no longer belonged to her. Not legally. Not financially. Not strategically. 2 hours earlier, while Isabella was still asleep, David had already finalized something irreversible. Every shared account frozen. Every discretionary fund revoked. Every legal permission she thought she had quietly nullified. And the most brutal part, her name was still on everything. She just no longer had access. Isabella found out the first time she tried to pay, at a boutique in Malibu. She handed over her card without a second thought. She was choosing a dress, something elegant, something respectable, something she planned to wear when she played the grieving. An exhausted wife in front of doctors and judges. The cashier swiped, declined. Isabella laughed lightly. "That's strange. Try again." Declined. A third time. Declined. People were watching now. Her smile stiffened. She pulled out another card. Declined. The cashier lowered her voice. "Ma'am, all your cards are being rejected." Isabella felt heat crawl up her neck. This had never happened before. Not once. She stepped aside, dialing David's number with sharp, irritated taps. Straight to voicemail. She texted him, "Something is wrong with the accounts. Call me." No reply. Back at the house, Isabella stormed through the doors, heels clicking like gunshots on marble. Ruth's adoptive father was in the garden with David, quietly tending to the plants, calm, unafraid, grounded. That alone unsettled her. David, Isabella snapped. "Why are my cards not working?" David didn't look up immediately. He finished adjusting the soil, wiped his hands slowly, and then met her eyes. "Oh," he said casually. Her chest tightened. "I've separated financial access until things are clarified," he continued. "Given your concerns about my father's mental state, it seemed irresponsible to leave you with unilateral control." Her face drained of color. "You did what?" "I protected my family," David replied evenly. "The same way you claim you were trying to." Isabella opened her mouth, then stopped, because for the first time, she realized something terrifying. He wasn't angry. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't reactive. He was in control. And control was something Isabella had never learned how to survive without. She tried to pivot. "David, this is ridiculous. You're letting emotions cloud your judgment. We need to act quickly." "Your father is perfectly competent," David cut in. "Multiple doctors agree. Independently. Quietly. Without your involvement." The word quietly landed like a blade. Isabella's mind raced. "You went behind my back?" "No," David said. "I went around you." That night, Isabella locked herself in the bedroom, pacing, texting lawyers, calling friends. No one answered. Her lawyer emailed back an hour later, due to a conflict of interest. "I can no longer represent you." Another message followed. "Please do not contact me again regarding this matter." Isabella sank onto the edge of the bed. For the first time since she married into wealth, she felt it slipping through her fingers, and somewhere deep inside, a horrifying thought began to form. If David had already taken her money, if he had already stripped her legal reach, then maybe, just maybe, he wasn't reacting to her plan. He was executing his own, and Isabella had just realized it far too late. Isabella felt it before anyone told her. The silence, no replies from her lawyer. No callbacks from the clinic. No messages from the women who used to flood her phone every morning. Her power network gone. That afternoon, she stormed into the living room where David sat calmly reviewing documents, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said sharply. Forcing confidence into her voice, David didn't look up. "About what?" Her jaw tightened. "About my access being restricted. My cards declined at the boutique. The clinic says they need your approval now. My attorney claims there's a conflict of interest." She laughed nervously. "This is a misunderstanding, right?" David finally met her eyes, and for the first time, Isabella saw something that terrified her. Not anger. Not heartbreak control. "There's no misunderstanding," David said evenly. "There's just a correction." Her smile cracked. "You can't do this without telling me." "I can," he replied. "And I did." Isabella's voice rose. "I was trying to protect this family." David leaned forward, his tone ice cold. "You were trying to erase my father." That word hit her like a slap. "Father." She tried a new tactic. Tears. "I was under stress. Anyone could have misunderstood my intentions. People exaggerate. I never meant harm." David tapped his tablet once. Audio filled the room. Her voice clear, cruel, calculated, every insult. Every lie. Every plan to institutionalize a man who trusted her. The room seemed to shrink around her. "Turn it off," she whispered. David Dean. Another recording played. Then another messages. Screenshots. Timelines. Her world was collapsing in real time. "You don't understand," Isabella cried. "If this gets out, my life is over." David stood. "You ended someone else's life slowly," he said. "This is just the truth catching up." She reached for him, desperation spilling over. "Please, we can fix this. I'll apologize. I'll say I was wrong. I'll do anything." David stepped back. "You already did everything," he said quietly. "And now, so will I." Isabella collapsed onto the couch, shaking. Her phone buzzed again. A notification headline flashed on her screen. Something had leaked. She hadn't just lost control. She had lost time, and Isabella finally understood the worst truth of all. David wasn't angry anymore. He was finished preparing. And when preparation ends, exposure begins. The room went silent in a way Isabella had never experienced before. Not the polite silence of rich people pretending everything is fine. This was the kind of silence that arrives right before a life collapses. David stood there calmly, Not shouting, not raging, because real power doesn't need noise. He simply pressed play. The screen lit up. Isabella's own voice filled the room. Every insult, every lie, every cruel laugh, every plan to erase the black man who raised him. The guests at the charity dinner, judges, executives, donors, reporters, watched in disbelief as the truth unfolded frame by frame. There was no editing, no exaggeration. Just Isabella, exposed by her own words. Someone gasped. Someone whispered her name like it was poison. Isabella tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her world was ending in real time. David finally spoke, his voice steady but lethal. This man is not my servant. He is not my burden. He is the reason I'm standing here today. He walked to his adoptive father and placed a hand on his shoulder, not as a billionaire, but as a son. Everything I am exists because this man chose love when the world chose abandonment. Then David turned back to Isabella. You didn't just abuse him. You underestimated him. And you underestimated me. Security entered quietly. Lawyers followed. Phones were already buzzing with breaking news alerts. Isabella's accounts were frozen. Her legal authority revoked. Her social circle vanished in minutes. The same people who once laughed beside her now avoided eye contact. She was escorted out of the mansion she thought she owned, and not a single person defended her. Weeks later, the headlines told the rest of the story. Charges, civil lawsuits, public disgrace. But David didn't celebrate. Instead, he did something far louder than revenge. He restored dignity. The basement was sealed forever. The uniforms were burned. And the man who had once been forced to bow now stood teaching young kids at a community center funded in his name. David watched him smile, truly smile, for the first time in years. You didn't need to destroy her, his father said quietly. You just told the truth. David nodded, because the greatest punishment wasn't humiliation. It was exposure, and the greatest victory wasn't power, it was protecting the one person who never stopped protecting him. Some people think money makes you strong, but real strength is standing up for the one who stood up for you when you had nothing at all.